So picture an ancient Greek god. You were probably imagining Zeus hurling thunderbolts from a golden throne, or maybe Ares starting another petty war, or, Hera acting out of jealousy.
Right, the classic Olympians.
Exactly. They form this beautiful, radiant company, and obviously their adventures make for excellent drama. But if you really dig into our source material today, which is a selection of excerpts from Edith Hamilton's foundational work on mythology, you realize something pretty striking.
Yeah, you really do.
If you were a regular human being actually living in ancient Greece, these majestic Olympians were basically useless to you. I mean, they were capricious, totally undependable, and often downright harmful.
Well, it's because the gods who held the most power in the traditional mythology were, frankly, the ones least connected to the daily grinding realities of human existence.
Makes sense.
I mean, the Olympians lived in a realm where no wind ever blows,
Yeah.
no rain falls, no snow touches the ground. They just feasted on nectar and ambrosia.
Must be nice.
Right. They were completely insulated from lasting grief. By definition, they were the happy gods.
Uh-huh.
But human life, regular human life, is defined by vulnerability. We are exposed to the elements, and we're intimately acquainted with grief.
Yeah, we suffer.
Exactly. So the Olympians simply lack the capacity to serve the deepest, most desperate spiritual needs of the ancient Greeks. They were just too perfect to be of any real comfort.
And that stark disconnect between the perfect Olympians and struggling mortals is really the focus of our deep dive today. We are going to look at two earth gods who break that mold entirely. Demeter, the goddess of the corn, and Dionysus, the god of wine.
Mankind's best friends.
Literally, these two figures were the true allies of humanity.
And the defining characteristic that separates Demeter and Dionysus from that whole Olympian crowd is that they were suffering gods.
Right.
They intimately understood heartrending pain. Through their stories, the ancient Greeks weren't just writing like fairy tales. They were engineering this highly sophisticated psychological framework.
To explain the world around them.
It's exactly. These myths explain the brutal cycles of the changing seasons, the terrifying dual nature of humanity, and ultimately they provided a rationalization for the hope of life after death.
So to understand how that framework functioned, I think we have to start with the baseline of human survival. Demeter. She's the goddess of the corn. And as our source notes, corn was sown long before vines were planted.
It's the foundation.
Yeah. She represents the absolute foundation of settled human life. Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Demeter is essentially the foundational tech stack for civilization. Before her, you have chaos, wandering hunter-gatherers.
Right.
But with her, you have farms, towns, laws, and eventually civilization itself. And her worship mirrored that very functional, grounded reality. Like, she didn't demand the grand, bloody animal sacrifices the Olympians seemed to crave.
No, not at all.
She was worshipped in the humble, daily acts of just making a farm fruitful.
Furthermore, it was deeply intuitive for the early Greeks that the deity managing this massive societal shift had to be female.
Oh, interesting. Why a female divinity specifically?
Well, think about the earliest days of human history. The division of labor was absolute. Men hunted and fought. The care of the fields, plowing, scattering the seed, reaping the harvest, that belonged entirely to the women.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, so they intuitively felt that a female divinity would best understand the life-giving, nurturing work of the soil. Her temple wasn't some pristine marble hall on a mountain. It was the sacred threshing floor.
That is so grounded. But then the functional reality of that harvest evolved into something much more profound, right? We see this with the Eleusinian mysteries.
Yes, her great festival.
Right, which occurred every 5 years. It lasted for 9 days, and all ordinary business completely stopped. Even the Roman orator Cicero later wrote that these mysteries literally transformed humans from savages to true humanity.
It was incredibly sacred.
But because the initiates took this strict vow of silence, the specifics are heavily obscured.
And the secrecy itself was a core mechanism of the ritual's power. It bonded the initiates together through this shared, unspoken understanding of mortality. But the fragments of info we do possess point to a stark simplicity.
Right.
At the most solemn moment of the ceremony, The worshippers weren't shown like a magical artifact or a terrifying beast. They were just shown an ear of corn that had been reaped in silence.
Just an ear of harvested corn.
That's it.
Which, I mean, that seems entirely anticlimactic unless you consider what it actually represents.
Yeah.
A seed has to go into the dark, cold earth. It basically has to die and be buried to multiply and return as food that sustains life.
Yes.
It is the absolute literal proof of life springing from death. But of course, the earth doesn't produce life continuously. And to explain why the earth becomes a frozen desert every winter, the Greeks didn't invent some literal ice monster.
No, they use something much more relatable.
They use the psychology of a grieving mother.
Exactly. The cold reality of winter was conceptualized through Demeter's devastating loss of her only daughter, Persephone.
And we all know the basic contours of this myth, right? The lord of the underworld bursting from a chasm to abduct Persephone while she's gathering flowers.
With his coal-black chariot.
Right, very dramatic imagery. But what's easily missed in all that drama is Demeter's psychological reaction. She doesn't mount some violent Olympian counterattack.
He abandons Olympus entirely.
Yes, she wanders the earth disguised as an old woman, succumbing to an incredibly human state of profound depression. She eventually ends up in the town of Eleusis, just sitting desolately by a well.
And she's taken in by a human woman.
Right, Metanira. She takes her in to nurse her young son, Demephone. And this brings up a section of the text that, frankly, stopped me in my tracks.
Ah, the nursing of Demephone.
Yes. Okay, so Demeter is acting as a wet nurse for this human baby. She feeds him divine ambrosia, and he thrives. But at night, she secretly places the baby directly into the, quote, red heart of the fire.
Which sounds horrifying.
It does. The human mother naturally gets suspicious, stays up, catches her doing this, and screams in absolute terror. And Demeter gets furious, throws the boy on the ground, and basically says, "Fine, stay mortal then."
It's quite a scene.
Wait, she tries to roast a human baby in a fireplace? I thought you said she was mankind's best friend.
Yeah.
For a goddess of civilization, this seems wildly destructive and honestly very much like the capricious Olympians we just criticized.
Well, this raises an important question. It is a shocking image, but we have to look at the underlying mechanics of the myth rather than just the surface action.
Okay, I'm listening.
Demeter's intent was the complete opposite of Olympian malice. She placed the child in the fire to burn away his mortality.
Wait, really?
Yes, she was attempting this painful, terrifying process to give him immortal youth, to basically set him free from old age and death forever. When the human mother screamed, she broke the magic.
Oh, wow. So the fire wasn't a punishment. It was more like a crude but necessary surgery.
Exactly. The myth serves as an allegory for human misunderstanding of divine intentions. We cling desperately to our safe, fragile, mortal lives, terrified by the painful transformations required for true resilience, or in this case, immortality.
That makes so much more sense.
So Demeter's ensuing anger wasn't petty jealousy over a slight. It was the sheer frustration of a divine being whose monumental gift was rejected out of human ignorance and fear.
And that frustration, combined with the unresolved grief over Persephone, turns into a terrifying display of leverage. Demeter isolates herself in her temple and simply lets the earth die.
A year of devastating global famine.
Right. The human race is pushed to the brink. It's a complete system crash. Zeus is forced to intervene because, well, without humans, there are no sacrifices for the Olympians.
He has to negotiate.
So he negotiates the famous compromise. Persephone returns, but because she ate the pomegranate seed in the underworld, she has to spend a third of the year back in the darkness.
And think about how terrifying winter must have been for ancient people before, modern logistics and global supply chains.
You're just completely at the mercy of the element.
Exactly. So this myth provided a vital psychological comfort. The earth isn't dead because it hates you or because it's fundamentally broken. It's dead because Demeter is mourning.
Right.
And when Persephone returns, she brings the spring. But Persephone is fundamentally changed by her experience.
How so?
Well, she is the radiant maiden of spring, but she carries the aura of the underworld. She has tasted death, which makes her a figure of awe. She always knows she has to go back.
Okay, so Demeter and Persephone give us the framework for physical survival and the processing of grief. They represent order, the reliability of the harvest, and the turning of the seasons.
The foundation.
But physical survival isn't enough to capture the full spectrum of human experience, right? We aren't purely rational, ordered creatures.
Not at all.
We have immense capacities for irrational joy, wild inspiration, and brutal violence. And to explain that, the Greeks needed a completely different kind of god. enter Dionysus.
Dionysus, the god of wine. He represents the unpredictable, passionate spirit of life, and his origins perfectly map onto the agricultural reality of the vine itself.
Oh, really?
Yes, so he's the last god to enter Olympus, and the only one with a mortal parent. His mortal mother Semele is tricked by Hera into asking to see Zeus's full glory.
Which mortals can't handle.
Right, so she is burned to death by the unshielded heat, but Zeus rescues the unborn infant Dionysus, hides him in his side, and he is eventually nursed by the nymphs of Nysa. Now, Bacchic lore identifies these nymphs as the Hyades, the specific stars that bring rain.
Oh, that is wild. So the god of the vine is born from literally burning heat and nursed by torrential water.
Precisely. What's fascinating here is that those are the exact two environmental extremes required to keep a grapevine alive and ripen its fruit.
Yeah.
The mythology is a direct reflection of the viticulture.
That is so poetic. And as Dionysus matures and begins wandering the world, the stories about him shift from those agricultural metaphors to demonstrations of inescapable quiet power, like the myth of the pirate ship. He's just standing by the sea, appearing as a wealthy, beautiful youth with rich, dark hair and a purple cloak. Pirates kidnap him, assuming they can ransom him.
Right, a classic mistake.
But when they try to bind him, the ropes magically fall apart before they even touch his skin. He doesn't fight them, he just sits there smiling.
And the helmsman recognizes the divine presence, right?
Yeah.
He begs the captain to release him, but the captain is just completely blinded by greed.
And the punishment is a total distortion of reality. It's so cinematic. Fragrant wine streams down the wooden deck. Vines consume the sail. Ivy chokes the mast. The youth transforms into a roaring mountain lion, and as the terrified sailors leap into the sea, they are instantly turned into dolphins.
It's an incredible scene.
He doesn't use a thunderbolt like Zeus. He uses psychological and physical distortion. He alters their reality. And that concept of altered reality leads us directly into the darkest, most contradictory elements of his worship.
The dual nature of the vine.
Right. You've probably been in a crowd, maybe at a concert or a festival, where the energy suddenly shifts from celebratory to dangerously uncontrollable.
It's a palpable shift.
The Greeks built that exact phenomenon into their theology with the Maenads, or the Bacchus, the frenzied female followers of Dionysus. I mean, the Olympians demanded pristine temples and orderly sacrifices. The Maenads rejected all of that.
It took to the wilderness.
Exactly. They abandoned the cities, went deep into the purest forests, slept on pine needles, and drank wild goat milk. It sounds like this beautifully liberating back-to-nature retreat.
Until you look at the horrific flip side.
Yeah. In the peak of their ecstatic frenzy, they would run down wild animals, tear them to pieces with their bare hands, and devour the bloody, raw shreds of flesh.
It's a brutal paradox. And this is the core of Dionysus. It is most vividly illustrated in the tragedy of King Pentheus of Thebes. Pentheus represents rigid, unyielding order. When Dionysus arrives in Thebes with his train of wild, dancing women, Pentheus is disgusted. He orders the god imprisoned, entirely ignoring the solemn warnings of the old blind prophet Tiresias, who recognizes Dionysus's true power.
Pentheus is the ultimate rationalist trying to police the irrational, and you simply cannot lock up the irrational parts of human nature.
No, it never works.
The prison doors literally unbar themselves. Dionysus tries to reason with the king, but Pentheus is consumed by his own hubris. So, Dionysus lets the trap snap shut. He strikes the women of Thebes with utter, blinding madness.
It's terrifying.
When Pentheus goes out to hunt them down, they don't see their king, they see a mountain lion.
And leading the charge to literally tear King Pentheus limb from limb is his own mother.
It is an incredibly gruesome image, the ultimate destruction of the most fundamental human bond, a mother murdering her own son. That is what happens when the Dionysian mob mentality takes over.
And you have to ask yourself why a highly civilized society would worship a joy god who is also a savage, heartless murderer.
Right, it seems so contradictory.
Well, it's because they were incredibly intellectually honest about the nature of wine and intoxication. Wine warms you, it cheers your heart, it brings careless ease, but it also strips away your inhibitions.
It makes people drunk.
And capable of atrocious, unthinkable acts. The Greeks didn't compartmentalize the fun parts of drinking from the terrifying parts. They fused the horror and the ecstasy directly into the divine character of Dionysus.
He wasn't a god sitting on a mountain observing you. He was a power operating within your own bloodstream. He made you feel like you could become divine yourself, and that power could either elevate you or completely destroy you.
Exactly.
But the trajectory of Dionysus doesn't end with raw meat and torn limbs, right? Over time, the culture evolved. The worship of Dionysus shifted away from literal, physical drunkenness and moved toward the concept of divine creative inspiration.
This is perhaps the most fascinating cultural evolution in the ancient world. By the 5th century BC, his great spring festival in Athens was an event of perfect peace. They even released prisoners from jail so everyone could participate.
Wow.
But the rituals performed to honor him were no longer wild frenzies in the woods.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The ritual was theater. The greatest tragedies and comedies in human history were written and performed as literal acts of worship to the god of wine.
The theater itself was his temple.
The actors and playwrights were his sacred servants. Instead of running into the forest to tear apart an animal, the citizens sat in an amphitheater to experience the tearing apart of human souls on stage. It provided the exact same emotional catharsis, but contained within high art.
And the reason tragedies, far more than comedies, became the centerpiece of his worship connects directly back to the agricultural roots of the vine.
Oh, how so?
Consider what happens to a grapevine in the winter. It is pruned more violently and aggressively than almost any other fruit-bearing plant. Every branch is cut away until only a dead, scarred, gnarled stump remains.
It looks utterly incapable of ever producing life again.
It suffers a visible, physical mutilation.
Well,
Dionysus, in the older myths, died a terrible death. He was torn to pieces by the Titans, but he was always resurrected. He died and rose again. Demeter grieved for the loss of someone else, but Dionysus experienced the agonizing tearing and the death himself. He is the ultimate tragic god.
And because he embodied a life that was repeatedly destroyed but always proved stronger than death, his role in the Greek spiritual ecosystem shifted completely.
He eventually replaced Persephone as the ultimate center of the Greek belief in immortality.
Because Persephone always kept the dark taint of the underworld, right? She was a captive there. But Dionysus conquered the underworld. He went down into the realm of death, rescued his mortal mother, Semele, and brought her up to live on Olympus.
He didn't just survive death, he defeated it.
And we see the profound impact this had on regular people centuries later. I mean,
Yeah.
around the year 80 AD, the Greek writer Plutarch received news that his young daughter had died while he was far from home.
That letter he writes is so moving.
It really is. He writes this letter to comfort his grieving wife. He doesn't tell her to just be strong, and he doesn't cite the Olympian gods. He tells her not to believe that the soul vanishes into nothingness because of the, quote, sacred and faithful promises given in the mysteries of Bacchus.
Dionysus.
Right. Those rituals surrounding Dionysus provided them with the absolute assurance that the soul is immortal and incorruptible, and that their daughter had passed into a better place.
It's an incredible journey. We started with Demeter, who provided the literal operating system for agricultural survival and a way to conceptualize the cold reality of grief.
And then we layered on Dionysus, who embodied the unpredictable, wild extremes of human psychology.
Together, these two suffering earth gods offered humanity a complete spiritual ecosystem. They were the gods who actually walked the earth, suffered the same pains as humanity, and offered a path through the darkness that the perfect, climate-controlled Olympians never could.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with something to mull over regarding your own life, building on what we've discussed today. The followers of Dionysus eventually realized that the exultant, overwhelming power of wine was just a physical signifier.
Right, it was a chemical shortcut.
Exactly, a shortcut to access the divine creative power that they already possessed inside them. They realized they didn't need to stay perpetually intoxicated to feel it. They evolved to channel that raw energy into the greatest theater, poetry, and art the world had ever seen.
A beautiful transformation.
So think about this. Today, we are constantly bombarded by external things designed to fix us, to distract us, or to give us a quick, fleeting spark of joy. We have endless modern equivalents of that initial literal intoxication.
Endless distractions.
Right. But if you look at the trajectory of Dionysus from literal drunkenness to the creation of profound divine inspiration, it asks a challenging question. Are you relying on the wine of modern distractions to cope with the chaos of your life? Or are you willing to endure the painful pruning of your own branches, cutting away the noise to find the deep creative inspiration that is already sitting within you? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the roots of mythology. Keep exploring, and we will catch you next time.